My boyfriend threw acid in my mother's face. Mason threw industrial cleaning solution in my mother's face during what was supposed to be my college graduation dinner. The restaurant erupted into absolute chaos as my mother collapsed screaming while her skin literally bubbled and peeled away from her skull. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't comprehend what Mason had just done. My father tackled him to the ground, punching him repeatedly. I wanted to scream, but my throat wouldn't work as I watched my mother's face dissolve. "She's been stealing Beatrice's identity for 3 years," Mason shouted while trying to shield himself from my father's fists, as 2 of my uncles jumped in to help restrain him, all of them slipping in the blood spreading across the floor. "She's been using their identical resemblance to drain her bank accounts." I was barely listening. My legs gave out and I crashed into a chair, but my father hesitated for just a second, his fist raised in the air, and Mason spit blood onto the floor while my mother rolled and thrashed, knocking over chairs and leaving smears of flesh on everything she touched. "I have video of her at 5 different banks," he yelled over my mother's inhuman screaming, holding the screen up while my uncle twisted his arm. "I noticed discrepancies in Beatrice's accounts when we were apartment hunting and installed tracking software, and I've caught her mother stealing $40,000. My mother writhed on the floor and tried to speak, but only managed to spray blood across the white tablecloth while her face continued to dissolve, and even through the destroyed flesh, I could see something in that look that made my stomach drop because it wasn't denial, it was rage at being caught. "Those accounts are family money," she finally shrieked through her melted mouth, the words barely human. "Mom," I whispered, but I couldn't hear my own voice over the chaos of people screaming and crying and calling 911 while my mother's face kept bubbling and peeling like plastic in a fire. My father grabbed the phone from Mason with hands covered in my mother's blood and skin, staring at the screen where my mother was clearly at an ATM wearing my clothes, and his face went white. "Linda, you've been stealing from our daughter?" he asked while she convulsed on the floor, her screaming never stopping. "She owes me everything," my mother managed to hiss between shrieks of agony, blood and tissue dripping onto the floor. "I gave up my career to raise her." The other diners were pressed against the walls filming everything while the manager was vomiting in the corner and servers were sobbing, and I felt like I was drowning because my own mother had been systematically destroying my future while her face was literally falling off in front of me. "You destroyed her face over money?" my father shouted at Mason, releasing him and stumbling backward, slipping in the puddle of blood and chemicals. "Even if she stole from Beatrice, you threw acid at my wife." Mason wiped blood from his broken nose and looked directly at me with an expression that made my blood freeze. "That's not why I had to destroy her face." Everyone went silent except for my mother's whimpering and the sound of her skin sizzling, and I heard myself ask, "What do you mean that's not why?" "I followed her to a P.O. box yesterday," Mason said quietly. "Check her purse." My mother started shrieking even louder and trying to crawl toward her bag, leaving a trail of dissolved flesh, but my father got there first and dumped it onto the floor where a small glass vial rolled out. "That's ricin," Mason said, his voice deadly calm now while chaos continued around us. "She was going to poison Beatrice at the mother-daughter spa trip next week and then completely take over her life." I vomited onto the white tablecloth. "You were supposed to die quietly," my mother screamed at me through the soup of her face. "After you were gone, I was going to be you, live as you, graduate medical school as you, because we're identical and nobody would ever know the difference." "She's already been preparing," Mason gasped, blood still streaming from where my father had beaten him while sirens wailed outside. "She's memorized all of Beatrice's friends' names. She's been recording Beatrice's voice to practice matching it. She's already redirected Beatrice's mail to that P.O. box, changed the emergency contacts at the medical school to only herself." My father dropped to his knees in the pool of blood. "I had to destroy her face," Mason said, looking at me desperately as police burst through the door with weapons drawn. "It was the only way to make sure she could never pretend to be you again." The paramedics rushed to my mother while police grabbed Mason. "Wait!" I screamed, but they were already dragging him toward the door while my mother shrieked from the stretcher. "There's more, Beatrice!" Mason yelled as they pulled him away, struggling against the officers. "About your father, about what she's been doing to him